In the quiet hush of a museum gallery, where art whispers more than it speaks, a solitary art restorer and a wandering illustrator collide in the space between preservation and creation. She sees the past in every brushstroke. He sketches the present like it might vanish if he looks away. What begins as a quiet interruption becomes something neither of them expected. A portrait of love, drawn one Sunday at a time. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The museum breathed in silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty or cold. It was alive, reverent. The kind of quiet that held history in its lungs, that stretched through marble corridors and echoed beneath domed ceilings, where footsteps became sacred and whispers felt like a sin. Evelyn moved through it like she belonged to it, like she'd been stitched into the fabric of its hush. Her flat-soled shoes made no sound as she crossed the floor of the European Paintings Wing, Gallery 204. The morning light sifted through high windows, casting fractured shadows across the floor, like stained glass without the color. She wore her gloves like a surgeon, precise, reverent, prepared for miracles. Her tools were lined in a velvet case she rolled out with the care of someone performing a ritual. The canvas before her, portrait of a young woman in gray, artist unknown, 18th century Italian, was propped on its easel waiting. She had spent weeks coaxing time from its corners, stripping away years of varnish and grime, revealing tiny breaths of pigment the world had forgotten. Her world was like that, measured in brushstrokes and bristles, in chemical solvents and soft brushes no wider than a grain of rice. She liked the order of it, the predictability, the distance. Art was beautiful, but it didn't demand anything of her except patience and attention. People, on the other hand, people were loud and unpredictable. That was why she noticed him immediately. He didn't belong there. He sat on a wooden bench a few feet away, bent over a sketchbook with a battered red cover. No museum ID. No gloves. No protocol. Just there. Like he had every right to sit in a room, not yet open to the public, and casually draw under one of the museum's priceless Rembrandts. Evelyn froze mid-step, her hand still gripping the tiny sable brush. The bristles barely moved with the breath she held. He didn't look up. She studied him carefully, the way she might study damage on a canvas. Tallish, maybe mid-30s, scruffy around the edges. His jeans were too faded, his boots too scuffed. A pencil was tucked behind one ear, and his curls were an unruly mess, like someone had slept in a storm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice even professional, but low enough not to disturb the paintings. "That area's restricted before 10. The man finally looked up. His eyes were a strange kind of gray, not cold but restless, like a sky trying to decide if it wanted to storm. "Oh," he said, blinking like he hadn't realized he was trespassing. "Right. Sorry. I just got kind of lost in it." He held up the sketchbook. On the page, Evelyn saw her painting, her restoration, rendered in quick, searching lines. Not precise, but full of emotion. The kind of lines that didn't copy so much as understand. Evelyn hesitated. She wasn't sure if it was the audacity or the tenderness of the drawing that stopped her from saying more. "You work here?" he asked, closing the book with a sheepish smile. "You look like you belong." She nodded. "Art conservation." "Right. Like art doctor? I try to make sure paintings survive people like you." He chuckled, low and warm. Guilty. She should have asked him to leave. Should have reported him. But instead, she asked, "How did you get in?" "I slipped in with a school group," he said, completely unapologetic. "I needed a quiet place to draw. Didn't realize I'd be caught by the painting's bodyguard." A pause. Then, "I'm Leo, by the way." Evelyn blinked at him. "You shouldn't be here." He nodded. "But I am." They stared at each other for a breath longer than polite. And then, from somewhere distant, the sound of the main lobby unlocking echoed through the halls. Visitors beginning to filter in, the spell of silence starting to unravel. Evelyn turned back to her easel, choosing the smallest brush in her kit. When she looked up again, Leo was gone. But the red sketchbook lay forgotten on the bench. The sketchbook sat there for almost 5 minutes. Evelyn didn't touch it right away. She glanced at it the way one might glance at a stranger's forgotten coat, like it wasn't her place to interfere, but it had certainly interrupted her sense of order. The red cover was worn, the corners frayed from use. There was a smudge of graphite on the lower half, as though its owner had palmed it during a moment of absent-minded concentration. It wasn't museum-grade paper, nothing archival or professional. Just cheap, everyday stock, meant to be filled fast and recklessly. It felt alive. She glanced toward the gallery entrance again. Visitors had begun to trickle in. Teenagers clustered around the more famous paintings, an elderly couple whispering in French near a landscape. But there was no sign of him. No sign of Leo. She hesitated, then picked up the sketchbook. It was warm from where it had rested on the bench. Something about that felt oddly personal. She flipped it open, not out of curiosity, she told herself, but in case there was a name or number inside. Instead, the first page showed a sketch of a child with impossibly large eyes, sitting cross-legged under what looked like a paper sky. Another, a scene in a forest where trees leaned toward each other like gossiping old friends. Then, the unfinished outline of the woman from Gallery 204, drawn loosely, her expression soft and unknowable, like a secret just barely withheld. The sketch was good. Better than she expected. Not perfect. There was a looseness to the lines, a hunger. But there was emotion in it, something intuitive and tender. He had seen the painting, not just looked at it. She should report the security breach. She should turn the sketchbook into lost and found. But instead, she kept it on her workstation while she finished cleaning the varnish from the lower right quadrant of the portrait. She worked in silence, though her thoughts were louder than usual, playing back the sound of his voice, the amused squint of his eyes, the way he'd said bodyguard, like it was a compliment. When her shift ended, Evelyn stopped by the information desk and left the sketchbook with a note. Found in Gallery 204. Ask for Evelyn if returned. She didn't expect to see him again. But he returned the next Sunday. Same boots, same curls, but this time he stood on the visitor's side of the gallery rope. He grinned when he saw her. Hey, you found my brain. You left it on a bench, she said, crossing her arms. Well, parts of it. Most of me's still scattered around this city. But thanks for rescuing the vital bits. She handed him the sketchbook. He flipped through it, frowning slightly as if he hadn't seen the pages in years. I liked your drawing, she admitted, surprising herself with the words. Of the woman. You captured her, incompleteness. He looked up, surprised. You saw that. You left it wide open. Leo shrugged, but there was a quiet pride behind the gesture. That painting. There's something lonely about her. Like she's listening to a room that no one else hears. Evelyn's arms loosened at her sides. That's why I picked it, she said. He smiled. Do you pick them, or do they pick you? It was the kind of question she normally wouldn't entertain. Too abstract, too poetic. But coming from him, it didn't feel like a trick. It felt like curiosity. Real and soft. I think, she said, glancing at the canvas behind her, the quiet ones always find each other. He looked at her like she'd said something profound. Do you ever let people stay? He asked, motioning to the bench. No, she said. But you can. Just don't draw on the glass again. He raised one hand in mock solemnity. Scout's honor. Evelyn turned back to her restoration work, unsure why she was smiling. Behind her, the red sketchbook opened again. Pencil whispered against paper, adding something new to a world that had already existed long before either of them arrived. It became a ritual before either of them realized it had become one. Sunday mornings at the museum were slower, quieter, the kind of quiet that didn't need to be earned. The tourists hadn't yet flooded the galleries, the families still en route from brunch. Only the devoted wandered the halls that early. Evelyn liked that about Sundays. They belonged to her. But now they belonged to them. Leo never asked permission after the second visit. He just began showing up, always around the same time, always with the same battered red sketchbook, and always with 2 coffees in hand. One for himself, black with too much sugar. One for her, oat milk, no sugar, extra hot. I Googled your order, he admitted one morning, sheepish. You conservation people are surprisingly well documented. She took the cup without a word and sipped. It was perfect. He didn't sit on the same bench every time. Sometimes he wandered a bit, found new angles, new paintings, new corners of silence to fold himself into. But inevitably, like a compass recalibrating, he ended up near her. Not too near, never overstepping, but just close enough that his quiet presence became part of the gallery's atmosphere. She worked, he sketched. Sometimes they didn't speak for an hour. It was the easiest kind of companionship Evelyn had ever known. And somehow, in the spaces between brushstrokes and pencil shadings, conversation unfolded in small, careful pieces. "Why children's books?" she asked once, eyes still on her painting. "Because grown-ups forget," he said. "They forget how strange the world is. Kids don't. They expect the world to talk back." "And does it?" Leo smiled. "Sometimes." He told her about his failed attempts at graphic novels, about an art teacher who said he'd never be good at serious work, about the agent who found him after he posted a drawing of a raccoon in a raincoat that went viral. She told him about pigments that could kill, about the delicate pH balance of canvas glue, about how the backs of paintings often held more secrets than the fronts. One afternoon, she let him peek through the microscope lens. "Whoa," he whispered. "It's like the brush has fingerprints." "It kind of does," she said. Some days, Leo showed her pages from his sketchbook. Small creatures. Forests that grew upside down. Rooms full of impossible books. He was working on a story about a museum that only appeared to lost children and a girl who could walk into paintings. Evelyn said nothing the first time he showed her, but her fingers traced the corner of the page like she was testing if it was real. Other days, he asked questions. "What's the loneliest painting in this place? Which painting would you steal if you knew you'd never be caught? If you were a frame, would you be gold leaf or carved wood?" She rolled her eyes. "That last one doesn't even make sense." "Doesn't have to," he grinned. "That's the fun." One Sunday, a janitor accidentally knocked over Leo's coffee near her station. He rushed to help, apologizing profusely, flustered. Evelyn just laughed, actually laughed, and something in Leo's face shifted like he'd caught a falling star and didn't know what to do with it. The next week, he showed up early. She was already there, dabbing at a tear in a Flemish tapestry. He didn't say anything, just set the coffee down on the ledge near her tools, took his usual seat on the bench, and opened his sketchbook. But instead of drawing the painting, he sketched her. Quick, light lines. The curve of her shoulders. The way her hair caught the museum light. The slope of her neck as she leaned in toward the tapestry. She didn't notice until he turned the book toward her. "You weren't supposed to draw me," she said quietly. "You're the most interesting part of the gallery." She stared at the page, unsure how to respond. She didn't recognize herself, not entirely, but there was something familiar in the way he'd caught her seriousness. Her solitude. There was no flattery in the drawing. No embellishment. But it was honest. "May I keep it?" she asked, surprising them both. Leo blinked. "Of course." He tore the page out carefully, handed it to her like it was something fragile. Evelyn slid it between the pages of a textbook when she got home that night. But before she did, she looked at it for a long time. Longer than she looked at most paintings. The painting didn't have a name. Not officially. The museum's catalog listed it as Portrait of a Young Woman, Artist Unknown, circa 1770. No title, no signature, no provenance beyond a shipping receipt from a Paris estate sale half a century ago. It hung in a dim corner of the European wing, beneath a too-heavy frame that overwhelmed the pale figure within. Evelyn had been working on it for weeks. There was something about it that resisted restoration, not in a technical sense, but in temperament. The layers were delicate, as if the artist had painted with hesitation instead of paint. Even the varnish felt reluctant, unevenly applied like it had been done in a rush or under duress. The woman in the painting stared straight ahead, but there was nothing accusatory in her gaze. Only distance. She looked like someone who had once been seen and then slowly forgotten. On the seventh Sunday, Leo noticed Evelyn staring longer than usual. He sat beside her work table instead of his usual bench. Not close enough to be invasive, but within reach of her silence. "You look like you're arguing with her," he said. Evelyn didn't glance up. "She won't tell me who she is. Maybe she doesn't know." She finally looked at him. Leo's eyes weren't teasing. He wasn't playing at being poetic. He meant it. "I've cleaned every inch of her," Evelyn said. "Under UV, under microscope. Nothing. No signature. No markings. Not even a preparatory sketch under the paint. She just appeared one day. Perfectly lonely. Leo folded his hands, elbows on his knees. He stared at the painting for a long time. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was careful, like a third party had joined the conversation and they didn't want to speak over her. "What would you name her?" he asked finally. "I wouldn't," Evelyn replied. "It would feel like lying." He turned toward her. "But don't you think she wants to be remembered?" Evelyn bristled just a little. "I restore the truth. I don't invent it." Leo didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, pulled out his sketchbook, and began to draw. She resumed her work, but her movements were slower than usual. Her thoughts kept circling his words. "Don't you think she wants to be remembered?" At some point, she asked, "Did you ever know someone who forgot who they were?" Leo didn't answer right away. "My dad," he said eventually. "Toward the end. Alzheimer's." Her hand paused, brush hovering above the palette. "He'd forget who I was sometimes. But he always remembered how he felt about me. I think. Sometimes the feelings stay even after the details vanish." Evelyn didn't know what to say. No one had ever brought something so vulnerable into the gallery before. Not in such a quiet, unflinching way. "That's why I draw," Leo said, glancing up at the painting. "Not to remember what things looked like, but how they felt. Maybe, if I sketch her, she'll start to feel real again." He flipped the page and began anew. She didn't interrupt. Minutes passed, maybe hours. When Leo finally turned the sketchbook toward her, Evelyn didn't expect to see what she saw. The woman was there, yes, but softened, younger, and more whole. The melancholy was still in her expression, but there was warmth beneath it, like she was caught mid-thought just before speaking. And somehow, though the features weren't exactly the same, she looked familiar. Evelyn's breath caught. It was her. Or not her, but something close. The angle of the cheek, the arch of the brow. Not copied, but echoed. Like he had reached into the painting and the person standing beside it, and found the space between. She didn't speak. Leo watched her with a question in his eyes, but didn't press. She reached out and touched the edge of the paper, fingertip light. "How did you know?" she whispered. "I didn't," he said. "I just drew what I saw." For a moment, the gallery felt smaller. Not claustrophobic, just more intimate. Like the silence had leaned in too. Evelyn closed the sketchbook carefully and handed it back. Neither of them said what hung between them. But that night, Evelyn stayed after hours. She didn't restore. She didn't clean. She just sat in front of the painting, the dim lights humming overhead, and whispered something into the air she hadn't spoken aloud in years. "My name is Evelyn." The museum transformed at night. By day, it was a sanctuary for the curious. By night, it became something different, quieter, darker, cloaked in velvet shadows. The artwork seemed to exhale once the crowds left, their painted subjects relaxing just slightly, relieved to be left alone again. But not tonight. Tonight, the museum wore its best face. The annual Winter Gala turned every gallery into a stage. Uplights bathed the marble in soft gold. A string quartet played Vivaldi from the grand stairway. Champagne moved like a current through the crowd, clinking in tall glasses held by manicured hands. The donors glittered. The curators glided. Everything smelled faintly of old stone and expensive perfume. Evelyn stood near the entrance to the European wing, adjusting her gloves. She didn't belong here. Not really. She was a behind-the-scenes person, scalpels and cotton swabs, solvents and silence. But the director insisted that each department be represented. So she came. Black velvet dress, low heels, hair pinned in a simple twist. She looked polished, maybe even elegant. But inside she was restless. She was scanning the room before she knew what she was looking for. And then she saw him. Leo, standing awkwardly near the sculpture atrium, tugging at the collar of a suit that clearly wasn't his. The sleeves were too long, the shoes slightly scuffed, but he wore it like armor, reluctantly but with a kind of charm. His hair was slightly tamed, though a rogue curl had already escaped. He spotted her seconds later. And for the first time since they'd met, Leo was the one who looked like he didn't belong. "Wow," he said when he reached her, eyes wide. She raised a brow. "Wow what? You look like you stepped out of one of the frames." She gave him a rare, tilted smile. "And you look like your tie is strangling you." He laughed and loosened it. Better. Barely. He handed her a glass of champagne, and for a while they wandered together, weaving through guests in gowns and tuxedos, pausing to admire works they had already memorized. It felt strange to be in the museum like this, when she wasn't working, when he wasn't sketching, when they weren't pretending they were only passing time in the same quiet room. This place feels different when it's dressed up, Leo murmured near a marble bust. So do I, Evelyn said without thinking. He glanced at her. You don't have to. She turned her face slightly, uncertain how to take the compliment. They found themselves in the Egyptian wing near the Temple of Dender, where the lighting was low and golden, casting long shadows across the ancient stone. The reflecting pool shimmered softly. The music from the stairway was just a distant echo now, Vivaldi fading into something more intimate. No one was around them for a moment. Leo leaned against the stone railing, looking up at the temple. You ever wonder how many people stood inside that thing before we even existed? He asked. What they whispered to the gods. What they begged for. Evelyn looked at him, her voice quiet. What would you whisper? Leo thought about it. Then he looked at her and said softly, I think I'd ask to stay. She blinked. Stay. In this moment. Before I mess it up. Before it gets complicated. There was no clever line after that. No sketchbook between them. Just the hum of the museum's deep breath, and the low music, and the warmth of him, real and imperfect beside her. He leaned in slowly, giving her space to turn away. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, just once, just enough to ask, not assume. It was soft, uncertain, careful, like he was afraid of breaking something delicate. When he pulled back, her eyes were still closed. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he said. She opened her eyes, and in a voice so soft he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, I know. And then, applause. From another room. The speeches had started. The spell broke. They both looked toward the sound, blinking like they'd surfaced from underwater. Leo chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. So that happened. Evelyn nodded. But she didn't step away. Not yet. He disappeared. Not dramatically. Not in a storm of missed calls or slammed doors, but with the quiet withdrawal of someone who had always drifted just a little outside the frame. One Sunday came and went. No Leo. Then another. Evelyn didn't ask the museum guards if they'd seen him. She didn't text, though his number sat in her phone, unread under Leo's sketchbook. She didn't allow herself to stare at the empty bench in Gallery 204 too long. But she noticed. In her mind, the absence began to grow edges. At first it was just curiosity. Then confusion. Then something colder, disappointment. The kiss in the Egyptian wing, the strange, soft, real thing they'd shared, it had meant something. At least she thought it had. She'd felt it like a bloom between her ribs, unfurling in slow, impossible color. Had she misread it? She resumed her work with a kind of brittle focus. Paintings couldn't ghost you. Paintings didn't promise and disappear. Paintings stayed. But then, 3 weeks later, he returned. Not in person. In a sketch. It was buried under a pile of folders someone had carelessly left on her workstation. She nearly tossed them aside before the splash of red caught her eye. The edge of a familiar cover, half stuck between documents. Leo's sketchbook. Not the full thing, just a single torn-out page. No note. No explanation. She stared at it for a long time before touching it. The drawing was unmistakable. The woman from the unfinished portrait. Only, it wasn't her anymore. Not exactly. The composition was the same pose, same slightly tilted head. But the expression had changed. There was recognition in her eyes now. Warmth, almost. Her lips were curved in something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't sorrow either. And the face. The face was hers. Evelyn. He'd drawn her into the painting. She didn't know how long she stood there, staring at the paper, heart pacing unevenly in her chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned it over. A number. His number. And a single line, written in pencil so faint she had to tilt it toward the light. Sorry. I had to finish something before I could come back. She called. The phone rang twice before he answered, out of breath. Evelyn. His voice, in real time, was a strange relief. A bomb. I got the sketch, she said. You left it like a breadcrumb. I wasn't sure you'd call. I wasn't sure I should. A pause. Then, yeah. I deserve that. She waited. Leo exhaled on the other end, slow and uncertain. I had a deadline. For the book. It's my first real chance, and the publisher wanted a full draft. Art, story, everything. I needed to shut the world out for a bit to finish. You could have told me. I didn't know how. I was afraid if I saw you again, I wouldn't want to finish it. Evelyn went quiet. You were never an interruption, Evelyn, he said softly. But you were distracting in the best way. You made the rest of the noise stop. I wasn't used to that. I panicked. There was sincerity in his voice. No charm, no performative regret. Just the raw edge of someone learning, fumbling. Is it done? She asked. The draft? Yeah. Sent it in 2 nights ago. And what now? Another pause. Now, Leo said. I'm sitting on a bench outside the museum. And I was about to text you. But I guess the sketch got there first. She glanced toward the main entrance, heart thudding once, then again softer. Without answering, she hung up. She left the gallery, walked the familiar marble halls, pushed open the heavy doors, and there he was. Sitting in the morning light, sketchbook in hand, looking up with that same crooked grin she remembered. You came, he said. I wasn't sure I would. He stood. I'm glad you did. They stared at each other for a long moment, the city moving gently around them. Horns in the distance, the rustle of a passing bus, the whisper of wind through scaffolding. And then Evelyn said the simplest truth of all. Me too. They didn't try to rush it. After all the near misses and quiet pauses, Evelyn and Leo moved forward like people afraid of waking something fragile. But it wasn't hesitation, it was reverence. Like they finally understood they weren't building something new, but returning to something that had quietly waited to be seen. Their first meeting outside the museum was simple. A park bench, cold coffee in paper cups, bare branches overhead, city sounds moving around them like background music. No paintings between them this time. No quiet halls to protect them. Just streetlight and skin and honesty. You talk less out here, Leo said, watching her stir the coffee with her finger. More comfortable with canvases than people? People have too many layers, she replied. Canvas only has one. Maybe 2 if someone lies. Leo smiled. And do I have too many layers? She looked at him, then back at her coffee. You're not as messy as you think. You just scribble too fast. He laughed, then reached into his coat and handed her something. Folded, worn, soft at the edges. Another sketch. This one wasn't a portrait. It was a room. A gallery. Gallery 204. And inside it, her. Restoring a painting. Light falling over her shoulders. Leo, sketched in the far corner, watching her work. A memory made ink. Evelyn touched the edge of the paper like she always did, careful and silent. Why this one? Because it's where you stopped being a painting. She blinked. I don't understand. You always seemed like someone already framed. Finished. But that day I saw you move. She folded the sketch gently, tucked it into her notebook without a word. From then on, their lives curved toward each other with quiet certainty. Leo kept sketching, his world of imagined beasts and wistful shadows spilling onto page after page. Evelyn brought him into hers slowly. Restoration labs, private collection visits, conversations about pigments that were made from crushed beetles and ultramarine more expensive than gold. They learned each other's patterns. Leo liked to draw with music on, jazz or old records that crackled. Evelyn worked in silence but loved to listen to him hum. She noticed how his fingers fidgeted when he was nervous, how he never finished his coffee, how he used the word strange like a compliment. He learned she spoke in facts when she was uncertain, that her world had rules because rules were safe, that she only ever let her hair down when she thought no one would see. One night, she invited him to her apartment. Not a grand gesture. Not a date. Just, I have a book on 18th century varnishes you might like. He came, book forgotten, and stayed until the sun turned the windows pale blue. They didn't kiss that night. But when he fell asleep on her couch, curled beneath a museum-branded blanket, she sat beside him and traced the line of his jaw with her eyes. In the morning, she made him coffee. He drank it all. It was raining the day of the exhibition. Not a dramatic, cinematic storm. Just a steady silver drizzle that turned the sidewalks to watercolor. Umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers outside the museum doors, and the coat check line curled past the lobby. Inside, the air shimmered with anticipation. The museum had cleared a modest gallery on the second floor. Gallery 118, small but warm, its walls now painted a soft twilight blue. It wasn't one of the grand halls. No marble columns. No priceless works. But it mattered, because it had been chosen. Because someone had decided that this was worthy of being seen. Evelyn arrived before opening. She didn't dress for attention, just a simple navy dress, hair down, black boots. She moved through the gallery the way she always did. Quiet, efficient, like her body was still trying to walk in a museum before the crowds arrived. But today, she wasn't the one in the background. Today, Leo's work hung on the walls. His debut show. 10 framed illustrations from the upcoming children's book, The Museum of Quiet Things. Each one drawn in his signature style, slightly whimsical, slightly sad, full of soft edges and small truths. Little creatures peeking out from forgotten corners. A boy who spoke to paintings. A girl who restored forgotten stories with a feather brush and a quiet voice. The room filled slowly. Fellow artists, museum staff, curious guests. The director made a short speech, calling Leo's work hauntingly gentle and a tribute to imagination in stillness. He smiled politely through it, fidgeting with the button on his sleeve, eyes darting toward the doorway until she stepped in. He straightened, smiled. Evelyn didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She moved slowly around the gallery, taking in the work, letting herself be seen by it, letting herself be felt. And then she stopped at the centerpiece, the largest piece in the collection, hung on a wall all its own. It wasn't from the book. It wasn't even for the public. It was a portrait of her. Not literal, no photographically perfect likeness. But her as he saw her. Evelyn mid-laugh, museum light cascading across her collarbone, one gloved hand frozen midair, as though she'd been caught restoring something not yet broken. There was joy in her eyes. Unscripted, rare. Below the frame, a small card. The moment I knew. L. Mathers. She felt something stir in her chest. Not just emotion, but recognition. Not of herself in the portrait, but of the way he'd seen her when she couldn't. She turned. Leo stood nearby, waiting. Not pushing. Just present. I wasn't sure you'd put it up, she said, her voice soft. I wasn't sure you'd come. They smiled, both a little tired from pretending they weren't holding their breath. She stepped closer. I didn't know, she whispered. Didn't know what? That I could be seen like that. Leo's gaze softened. You've always been visible, Evelyn. You just thought the glass was one way. They stood in silence then, surrounded by his work and her stillness. The gallery buzzed quietly around them. But in that moment, it didn't matter. In that moment, the world outside the frame faded. And inside it, they stayed.